All right, boys and girls, let's review our initial sounds again. Remember, we have qu, quick, quirk, quack. We have squash, square, squeak. We have think, theft, thorn. And we have through, thrash, threat. Let's go over them again. Quick, quirk, quack. Square, squash, squeeze. Think, theft, thorn. Through, thrash, threat. All right, let's look at our vocabulary words. Biography, the true story of someone's life. Emancipate, to set free. Jealousy, that feeling you have when you want what others have. Conflict is like an argument. Determined, you are going to do it no matter what. The new word we have today is risk. A risk is when you take a chance that could lead to something dangerous or embarrassing. So I think we're going to find out that Abe takes a risk today. Let's continue with our biography of Abraham Lincoln by Augusta Stevenson. This chapter is called Forest Adventures. Sometimes Abe had a little boy to play with now. His name was Austin Goler, and he lived with his parents in a log cabin on Knob Creek. The Goler cabin was 3 miles from the Lincoln cabin, and the road was very rough. It went up a steep hill, down a steep hill, over great roots and rocks and bumps, so the two families couldn't visit very often. But whenever Mrs. Goler visited Mrs. Lincoln, she took Austin. And whenever Mrs. Lincoln visited Mrs. Goler, she took Abe. Austin was 2 years older than Abe, but Abe was now so large and strong that he could do everything Austin could. The boys had great fun together. They played in the woods around their cabins. They played in the creek near their cabins. But deep into the forest, away from the trails, they were never allowed to go. You boys must wait until you learn more about the forest, said Mr. Lincoln. It is full of danger. Yes, indeed, said Mr. Goler. There is great danger to all who do not understand the forest language. What do you mean? Asked Austin. How can a forest have a language? Abe wanted to know. The forest has many sounds and warnings, and you must know what they mean, said Mr. Goler. When you have learned that, you will know its language. And if you don't obey its warnings, you may never get out alive, added Mr. Lincoln. The boys were obedient. Not once did they run away to play in the deep woods. Several months passed. Then, one day, Mr. Lincoln said, Boys, you are old enough now to study the forest. When do you want to begin your lessons? Now, Father, said Abe, if that suits you. Yes, said Austin. Now, Mr. Lincoln, if you please. First, Mr. Lincoln taught them to walk like Indians without making a noise. They learned to keep away from dry leaves and broken twigs. They learned to pass bushes without breaking off a leaf. They learned to cover their tracks and to follow the tracks of others. Mr. Lincoln showed them how to hide and how to crawl so quietly that one could scarcely see the grass move. All this was not learned in one day. The boys practiced weeks and weeks. At last, Mr. Lincoln was satisfied. You boys do very well, he said, as well as Indian boys of your age. Listening lessons. Then, Mr. Lincoln taught the boys to listen to the sounds of the forest. You must know all the cries and sounds of the birds and beasts, he said. You must know what they mean. He taught them the cries of the eagle and the panther, the hiss of the snake and its rattle, the scream of the wildcat, and the different growls of the bear. It took a long, long time to learn these sounds. It was as hard as arithmetic, that's math. But the two boys kept at it, and after a while their ears were sharp as razors. When a bird called, they could answer. They could hoot almost as well as any screech owl. But when they heard the cry of an eagle, they knew they had to hide. And when they heard a rattle, they ran straight home. Tracking lessons. From Mr. Goler, the boys learned the tracks of animals, birds, and snakes. This took a long time too, but the boys kept at it, and after a while, their eyes were as sharp as their ears. They followed a fox's track to his den and saw the handsome fellow. They followed a rabbit's tracks to her nest and saw the baby rabbits. They followed deer to a pool and saw the pretty deer drinking. They followed the tracks of a groundhog and saw him digging his home. They followed the tracks of a beaver and saw him cutting a tree. Some tracks they did not follow. Boys, said Mr. Goler, when you see a bear tracks, you must go the other way. And you must never follow the tracks of panthers or wildcats. And here they are watching the beaver cut down the tree. The boys obeyed him. They knew now that it was safety first in the forest. They learned to notice everything. If a twig was broken, they saw it. If the moss was crushed, they knew it. One day, they thought they saw a log move. Neither boy thought of running to the log and jumping on it. Neither boy screamed. No, indeed. They hid behind a tree and watched. Not one word did they speak. Not one sound did they make. The log moved again. And then something came out of it. A big black bear. The two boys ran home, and they ran just as fast as their legs could carry them. The cry in the woods. One summer day, Abe and Austin were playing in the woods. They swung in a strong grapevine swing. They swung up into the blue sky and far out over the wide creek. It was great fun. They smiled and laughed and sang and whistled. Then Austin said, "Let's play Indian." "All right," said Abe, "let's go to the cave. It's the best place in the world to play Indian." They jumped to the ground and started toward the cave. "You're right," said Austin. "That cave is the best place in the world to..." Just then, they heard a strange sound, a cry. Both boys stopped instantly. "What was that?" whispered Austin. "It sounded like a baby crying." "A baby? Out here in the woods?" said Austin. "That couldn't be, Abe." "Of course not, Austin. I said it sounded like one." Then the boys heard it again. "I can't understand it," said Austin. "It comes from those bushes," said Abe. "I'm going to see what it is." Austin seized Abe's arm. "Don't go over there," he said. "It might be a panther. A panther can cry just like a child." "But it might be something that is badly hurt," said Abe. "I think it's a panther, Abe. I wouldn't go near those bushes." "I'll wait till it cries again," said Abe. "Shh," said Austin. "There it is." "I know it's something that's hurt," said Abe. "It has that kind of sound. I'm going." He ran toward the bushes. Austin waited just 1 minute, then he followed. He couldn't hang back when his chum went on. Chum is a word for friend. The boys had reached the bushes when they heard the cry again. It was there, right by the place where they were standing. They parted the branches, and as Abe had expected, there was something that was hurt. There lay a little dog with a broken leg. Now, I have to stop and monitor myself here because that doesn't make sense to me. They are in a forest, and forests might have beavers or panthers, possums, birds, but not dogs. Dogs are animals that are brought into forests by people. They are not wild forest animals, so it doesn't make sense to me that he would find a dog deep in the forest. But it says right here that he did, so I guess we'll have to read and see if we can find out where the dog came from. Poor doggy, said Abe. Poor doggy, said Austin. The little dog looked at them. Then he cried again and again. Don't cry, doggy, said Abe. I'll fix your leg. I know how. He made a splint of stiff bark. Then he put the splint on the broken leg and tied it with strips of soft bark. Austin watched him. I wish I knew how to make a splint, he said. Father showed me, said Abe. The poor little dog stopped crying and licked Abe's hand. That was his way of saying, thank you, little boy. Let's hide him in our cave, said Abe, till he can walk. The very thing, said Austin. I'll go ahead and make a bed of leaves. Abe lifted the dog gently and carried him to the cave. Gently he lifted him on the bed of leaves and patted his head. I'll take care of him, said Abe. I live nearer the cave than you do, Austin. I'd look after him if I could, said Austin. You know that, don't you, Abe? Of course I do, said Abe. You would never let the poor dog go hungry any more than I would. Then the boys patted the dog again and went away. That evening, Abe took food and water to the dog. He fed him every day. He gave him fresh water every day. He made a new bed of leaves every day. As soon as the dog could walk, Abe took him home. The broken leg was crooked, but it was strong. Abe named the dog Honey because he loved him dearly, and the dog loved Abe dearly and followed him everywhere. And here's a picture of Abe and Honey. Okay, so the boys had a lot of lessons to learn in this chapter. They had to learn the language of the forest, and they took a risk going to see what that dog was, see what was making the sound. It turned out to be a little dog that was hurt, but it could have been anything, but I guess they relied on their lessons. Abe was pretty sure it was something that was hurt and not something that could harm them. So we'll continue reading tomorrow. Thanks for listening.